We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The march of time.
From the onset of World War II, hundreds of thousands of men signed up and went to war. 6 million women were recruited and went to work. They worked as welders, fitters, and burners in defense plants and shipyards. Each was known as Rosie the Riveter.
While other girls attend their favorite cocktail bar, sipping dry martinis, munching caviar, there's a girl who's really putting them to shame. Rosie is her name.
This film, The Life and Times of Rosie the Riveter, documents an important chapter in the history of working women. The war was a time when women were needed to work at jobs never before open to them. This documentary is a brainchild of Berkeley film director and producer Connie Fields.
The film is as much about media and media images of women, and also the effect of media on our lives, as it is about the story of working class women during World War II. And Rosie the Riveter is a media term. The film is a lot also, juxtaposing myth with reality. The common mythology is these women were housewives before the war, took their job for patriotic reasons only, gladly went home and went off to the suburbs and raised their 2.5 kids and lived happily ever after.
With the station wagons and dogs.
Exactly. Well, that wasn't exactly the case.
More and more men are being called into the armed forces. Their jobs must be filled, and filled now. And who can fill them? You women.
They had one where they were, calling women to work, and you saw all these women sitting around playing bridge and immediately running out, but they were playing bridge. There was just no assumption that the women had been working before. Also, they had this other one that is just quite incredible, where it's talking about interviewing all these women as why you took your war job.
I'm an old maid, and I didn't have anyone until I took this defense job. Now, I have a family of 10 million to look after.
Do you have to have a reason? We're in a jam, aren't we? I'm sorry, but you'll have to excuse me. I'm too busy to answer damn fool questions like that.
Rosie's got a boyfriend, Charlie. Charlie, he's a Marine. Rosie is protecting Charlie, working overtime on the riveting machine.
Connie had no trouble finding the Rosies of the war. More than 700 women from all over the country responded to her informal search. She and her researchers interviewed 250 women, finally selecting 5 for the movie. One of the Rosies in the film is Lynn Childs. She moved to San Francisco during the war years to work in the shipyards.
The first time I saw the movie, I was astounded and I was thrilled. I said, oh no, you mean to tell me you're doing a film that's going to tell the truth about what happened? And then I love the tie-in she made with the propaganda. One scene is the propaganda and then the reality following it up.
After a short apprenticeship, a woman can operate this press as easily as a juice extractor in her own kitchen. And a lathe will hold no more terrors for her than an electric washing machine.
Actually, most of the propaganda was that we were getting into it as a patriotic thing to help our country. It was more an economical thing. We needed money, we needed jobs, and so we came into the field to earn our living. And after the war was over, we had hoped that we would continue to be able to work in the field that we were trained in. However, that turned out not so true.
How do you like your job, Mrs. Stoner?
I love it.
How about after the war? Are you going to keep on working?
I should say not. When my husband comes back, I'm going to be busy at home.
Good for you.
Lee Dunning, who now welds on landing barges. And what about after this war, Lee?
Well, this job belongs to some soldier. When he comes back, he can have it.
Oh, that's swell.
After the war was over, we had the propaganda started, go home and have babies and go and cook and all the rest of the whole propaganda scene, that we were no longer needed in the shipyard. Our men was back home and they needed their jobs back, and that's was the propaganda.
Each returning serviceman will get his job back when this war is won.
and you women and girls will go home, back to being housewives and mothers again, as you promised to do when you came to work for us.
I found myself in the lines walking up and down the streets trying to find a job. And women were not hired in burning or welding or anything else. We tried in every industry in the city to try to get a job, but they would not hire us in that capacity. They'd always laugh at you, and say, well, you're a woman, what are you doing? Why don't you go home? This kind of approach.
The family was solidly founded on the father as patriarch and breadwinner, and on the mother as cook, housekeeper, and nurse of the children. One of the trends of modern life, which has been cited as most disruptive of marriage, is the increasing economic independence of women.
So when G.I. Joe was mustered out, Rosie the Riveter was forcibly retired. Retired, but not forgotten. It would take the country a while to realize it, but all the Rosies had made a point. A job has no gender.
Do you look at a lot of these women who are now into the jobs and say, well, listen, we did that 40 years ago?
No, I don't bring it up to them. I say, go, girl, I'm glad to see you doing that, because you don't have to go in traditional jobs. You don't have to be stereotyped and say you go and do this and do that, and this is what your women are supposed to do. Go, I think it's great. I like to see women doing that.
Compared to kinetic racing, all other forms of human endeavor are insignificant.
They call it the Great Arcata to Ferndale cross-country kinetic sculpture race, and this is a kinetic sculpture. But it also has to be a vehicle because it's about to take off on a 3-day, 32-mile trip across roads, but mud and sand and water too, so it has to float. And there's no engine or motor. They all have to be people-powered.
The secret is green.
Yeah. Green. We have a 5-gear speed down in the back, which runs off the common sprocket we've got up here in front. The 5-speed is connected up to another sprocket, which runs back to the axle, which has 5 gears on that. So 25, usable of about 17.
And that energy is transferred into the transmission, and from there down to a differential, which turns the rear wheels, and off we go.
Well, I got a dual chain drive. I'll hook up another chain, drive it off the 5-sprocket rear end of the 10-speed.
The floats will flap down, fold down. We'll support them underneath. The paddles will snap onto the rear axle, and we keep pedaling. Just right in the water, over the other side, right out of the water, and Victory City. That's what we're going to do, right?
That must be your boss. I know, you can't drink on TV.
You name it, somebody's put wheels on it and entered it here. Everything from a huge human wheel with inner tubes to a human-powered 15-man bus. The people-powered bus is the brainchild of Hobart Brown. It was Hobart who started this whole thing 8 years ago.
The ultimate goal is to get a human being to lever the energy and everything else to carry a payload like sleeping bags and survival equipment across mud, sand, water, and everything else, and do it only with the leverage of the human body.
This race begins with an Indy Le Mans style start. That's where the announcer says,
"Gentlemen, start your gentlemen."
And they're all off and running. The first day begins on an easy leg, over city streets, downhill. Then come the highways and the byways, even a trip along a dike in a marsh, and finally everything comes to a screeching halt here, the sand. So far, 80 vehicles are still in the race. Only 40 will come out alive the other side of the dunes.
I've never had so much fun.
Well, the afternoon is over and all of the haggard teams are now coming into the parking lot at the end of the first day. Some won't make it in until after sunset, some won't make it in at all. But right now they haven't got much time to do repairs and such because it's only a matter of hours before they have to head for the starting line again.
now my problem may be what we call in France the Jacques Cousteau effect. You go into the water and submerge, and go to the bottom and see the fishes.
Right now, all of the kinetic sculptures are lined up for the biggest event in day number 2 of the race, which is to cross 1 mile of this bay. Now, a lot of them float better than they roll on wheels, but the rest of them have never been tested on water. For some of them, this will be their first trip on water, and for others, the last. So far, we've covered 14 miles of mud, sand, and highway, and for what? There's no money waiting at the end of all of this. Since many of these contestants come from office jobs, they're not in the physical condition it takes to run one of these. Let's face it, this is a real marathon. Ask them, and they keep telling you it's for the glory. What glory?
I've been doing this since I was 16, and he's been doing it since he was 16. I think we're pretty good. As a matter of fact, we're so good, the machine we built last year, the Golumkis, the 3-time winners, copied this year.
Yeah. We figure that the sand is, nobody can really go that fast, and we designed a super light rig so that we can just push it as fast as anybody could ride one. That's why we're in first.
Okay, it's the start of the 3rd and final day of the race. In the morning, to make things worse, as if the dunes and everything weren't bad enough, it rained all night and it's raining this morning. Everybody is camped out there on that island in misery. They're going to have to cross this river of mud as the start of the 3rd and final day, heading to the finish miles away. We are now barely a mile from the finish line in the Victorian village of Ferndale. It's raining even harder, and who's out a mile in front? Once again, the Flying Golumki Brothers. That's really their name.
Fourth year, number 1.
So you think the long-distance runner is lonely? Look at the finish line these Golumkis are crossing. You could hide nuclear waste here and nobody would know. For the glory? Ask the rest of the field, still fighting the slog that even the cows had the sense to come in out of.
Depends on who you ask how long we've been racing.
Seems like it's been 3 months.
My legs would tell you about 6 months straight. My back would tell you about 5. My head says we're already planning for next year.
No, this race is not to the swift nor the strong, but to the sprocket-hearted. We'll be back in just a minute.
Let's join Richard up in Montana, up in grizzly bear country.
A million acres of outdoor paradise, Glacier National Park, shared by the United States and Canada, and by more than 100 rare animals. The creatures here have almost gotten used to humans, and you can get your camera pretty close to a moose or deer or elk right from the car window. But to most of the 26 million visitors to the park, Glacier means wilderness, getting so far away from it all that only a 2-day hike will get you there. It's exhilarating, it's adventurous, but it's not carefree. Every step in Glacier is a step into the home of the largest, fiercest, most powerful animal in North America, Ursus horribilis, the grizzly bear.
Immediately to my right, I just turned and I heard a growl and a snarl, and I turned and all I saw was black fur and teeth coming at me.
And I got up the tree a ways and was hunching up, and she bit across my shoulder and pulled me out onto the ground again.
So I dropped down on my knees right in front of the bear and looking her right in the face, and I could see my fingers hanging out of the bear's mouth. And I was patting her on the nose and talking to her and yanking on my hand trying to get out of her mouth.
Unlike most creatures who would sooner back down and run from a human unless provoked, This bear attacks by its very nature, sometimes unprovoked. The grizzly is used to being king of the forest.
The grizzly bear obviously has a reputation as being somewhat more defensive of its young, more aggressive towards humans, and I think that's an adequate description.
Cliff Martinka is a national park biologist who's been studying the grizzly bear for 14 years.
In bear country, we do have to live with and put up with certain rates of encounters. Grizzly bears are an animal, when they do have an encounter with people, it is likely to be a very aggressive encounter, and somebody is likely to be hurt or perhaps even killed.
Last year, 3 people were killed by grizzly bears in the park. In 2 of the cases, the bears actually began to consume the human. There were more injuries last year than in any other previous year, and bear attacks are on the increase. A human can do little against this bear. A grizzly can weigh well over half a ton and stand 10 feet on its hind legs. It's fast enough to run down a racehorse in a sprint, and strong enough to rip the door off a car. What we're talking about here is an unimaginably strong and agile animal. But to the man who shot this remarkable film of the grizzly bear in the wild, the grizzly also is an animal with many personalities.
What do you think grizzlies are? Are they playful, are they intelligent, or are they just mean, or what?
Well, they're all those things. They're a complicated, intelligent animal. A lot of people that know grizzly bears the best, like Innes Mills, who wrote a book called Grizzly, considers the grizzly bear far and beyond the noblest animal on this continent. And grizzly bears are all those things. They're terrifying, they're playful, they're complex. They're like people.
Doug Peacock is not a professional photographer. He is not a biologist. He is not a government naturalist. What he is an outdoorsman, someone who has watched bears carefully, lovingly, for nearly every day of the last 5 years in Glacier National Park.
It's quite within the range of grizzly bears to kill human beings, and as long as you insist on packing human beings into grizzly country, it's going to happen over and over again.
You hear the word habituation a lot around here. What it means is that for the past 70 years, grizzlies have learned that humans in the park do not harm bears or even defend themselves from attack. They now associate man with food.
We've got a lot of bears that have become very accustomed to people because of the constant contact, and so more of the encounters turn into a conflict situation in recent years. So that's probably the explanation. I don't think there's been any change in the population of the bears. There's been a change in the population of people, is what it comes to.
Chuck Jonkel probably knows more about the biology of bears than anybody in the world. A grizzly research scientist for the University of Montana, he is in charge of the snare and tag operation in the park.
If we could find a way where they could be punished for these behaviors we don't want them to have, I think we could retrain them, but it's a real problem, especially in the park where you don't have this light hunting pressure, and where the public won't let you use rubber bullets and things of that sort.
Jonkel is talking about suggestions that troublesome bears be shot with rubber bullets or rock salt or even hunted to instill a fear of man. Right now, whenever a grizzly does charge a human on a hiking trail, whatever action the Park Service might take against the bear, standard operating procedure is to close the trail.
The criterion for removing a grizzly bear in this park happens to be aggressive behavior. Well, that's exactly what the grizzly bear is. If it ain't aggressive, it ain't grizz. And like I told you, the grizzly bear evolved in an open environment, and its principal behavioral adaptation was increased aggressiveness. And you can't get rid of that trait without really fighting against what the bear is.
If we dispose of all grizzly bears who dare to be ferocious, we'll soon have a population of bears resembling grizzlies, but they won't be grizzlies. Still, bears are being drugged and removed. Humans have been banned from the trails, and bears have been shot and killed. The only thing left to ensure no human is killed by a grizzly again is to return the park to the bears.
We ought to realize that that the greatest value a wild animal like a grizzly bear can have is not necessarily as an object for scientific inquiry. It's not necessarily as an object for me as a filmmaker or a photographer. The most important function that animal can have, I think, is in the human imagination. And it's much more important to know the animal is there than to see it, as much as I'd hate to do it. If I had to, I would never go into grizzly country again. It's much more important to me just to know it's there. I think the real importance of animals, of the grizzly bear, is as an idea.
In the continuation of our story, we'll hear from people who've been closer to grizzly bears than anyone will ever care to be, the victims of grizzly bear attacks, tomorrow on Evening Magazine.
It was pretty intense. I don't know, what went through my mind most was how many things I would have liked to have done in my life that I didn't do and kept putting off.
The first thing that popped into my mind was, oh, thank God it's a small bear.
I hope I don't meet another one. At least not that close.
To the 26 million people who've come to Glacier National Park since it opened, Glacier is the place to go for some of our last remaining wilderness, 1 million acres of it. But another statistic is diminishing enthusiasm these days. In the last decade, dozens of people have been mauled. 4 people have been killed by the biggest, most powerful animal in North America, the grizzly bear. There were more bear attacks in the last year than in any previous year, and 3 of the deaths occurred in recent months. The bear in each case actually began to eat one of the victims. Compared with the number of hikers who've never seen a grizzly, your chances of harm are slim here. But the chances have seriously increased in the past 2 years. Right here on this bank of the St. Mary River last summer, 2 very experienced hikers set up camp for the night, Jane Ammerman and Kim Eberly. They had done everything right. They had not disturbed any bears. They didn't know there were any bears in the area. They did not keep any food in their camp. Still, around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, a grizzly invaded their camp, dragged both of them up and down the bank of the river, killed them, and in fact began to eat one of the campers. Kim Eberly's brother Bill was attacked by a grizzly bear in the same park just 1 year earlier, but Bill Eberly lived to hike again and tell about it.
And as we turned around, she was heading horizontal across the slope there, and she all of a sudden started charging down. And there were only but a few really small trees in the area. We tried to climb up some of the lower branches were dead, and they were really narrow trees. They didn't provide much support, so I tried to shuffle up away, but she bit into my thigh, and it was just kind of a pulling feel. It was pretty sharp. It wasn't a lot of pain, but she pulled me onto the ground and started nipping my back, similar to a dog bites, it felt like at the time, and then just sort of backed off.
Also lucky enough to talk about it is Roscoe Black, a man born and raised in the park. He and a woman companion were almost on top of a grizzly in the brush before they knew what happened.
Immediately to my right, I just turned and I heard a growl and a snarl, and I turned and all I saw was black fur and teeth coming at me, and hit me and knocked me off the trail. It chewed on my leg for a while, and then lay basically on top of me with its head right in this area. I could look directly into its eye.
J. Gordon Edward also stared a grizzly in the face. Edward is the author of The Climber's Guide to Glacier and was on a climb when he was charged by the mother of 2 cubs. He hoisted his ice axe just in time for the bear to lunge onto it. That bought him a few seconds.
At this point, she took a tremendous jump, and the point of the ice axe went into her chest again. But she hit me so hard, I have a scar across here from this blunt edge of the ice axe hitting me. Knocked me uphill about maybe 5 feet, so fast that my left hand flipped out, and then she grabbed my hand in her mouth. So one minute I'm standing here feeling pretty good, and the next second I got my hand in the bear's mouth. And I didn't want her to stand up and start raking with those big claws, so I dropped the ice axe, and I dropped right down on my knees in front of her. And I was yanking on my hand, trying to get out of her mouth and talking to her, saying, "Come on, let go of my hand, I'm not going to hurt you." And I was patting her on the face or on the eyes, and she blinked those big eyes when you pat them. She'd close her eyes, and she never bit down hard, though, just held like a vice, and it was numb. And so I kept watching my fingers hang out the bear's mouth and hoping I didn't see them drop off. And then suddenly she let go, and I saw my hand come out of her mouth, and of course it was bloody, and I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't disappear, which is what I'd like to have done. But I had to do something, and up there you hear about everybody playing dead. So naturally I wanted to play dead. In one movement, my hand came out of her mouth, and I wheeled around, and I fell on my face in the other direction. Crossed my hands above my head so I could get the pressure point on my wrist and keep the blood down. Dropped on my face and didn't move.
Gordon Edward probably owes his life to playing dead. Bill Eberly did not lie still and is convinced now that he should have.
And as she backed off, I made another run for a tree. And I think if I had stayed in place and not moved, that she might have left but I think this kind of egged her on. And I got up the tree a ways and was hunching up, and she bit across my shoulder and pulled me out onto the ground again.
So if you give little or no resistance and basically play dead, which is a very difficult psychological thing to do, if you've got something chewing on you, it's very difficult not to raise your voice or become upset with the fact that you're going to lose an arm. The lady I was with was dumbfounded for a moment, and then she dropped her pack and started back towards some timber that we'd just come out of, and he grabbed the boot with his teeth and pulled it down, and then grabbed her calf and stripped that from her knee down to her boot top. And then he pulled her out of the tree and bit her one more time on the leg. Came back to me and gave me another look, and I went, oh boy, here we go again. And just looked at me, and I played dead. And he stood up and smelled the air and took off.
The best thing to do is avoid bears entirely. 90% of the time, the grizzly will hear or smell you and leave. To make sure, sing or shout on the trail. Wear bells. Women are warned against hiking during their menstrual periods, and no one should wear colognes or even insect repellent. If you do meet a bear, stand still. Don't run, don't shout. If you have time, climb a tree. Adult grizzlies can't climb. If the bear charges anyway, the best thing you can do is play dead and hope for the best, which is what worked for Gordon Edward and Roscoe Black. Roscoe Black today still goes hiking in the park. And on occasion, Bill Eberly goes fishing and hikes to the lakes. And Gordon Edward is still out there climbing somewhere. All of them resolved in the belief that the only sure way to avoid an encounter with a grizzly is to avoid Glacier National Park. And they love the park too much for that. We'll be back in just a minute.